Good evening, Western Standard viewers, and welcome to Hannaford, a weekly politics show of the Western Standard. It is Thursday, October the 23rd. In Alberta, we've just had municipal and school board elections, and we see a lot of new faces. But in Edmonton and Calgary, at least, to me, it doesn't look like the political center of gravity has changed much. But I could be wrong. Here with me tonight is somebody who will know. Patrick Poilievre, who for the past 4 years was a political staffer in Calgary City Hall. Welcome, Patrick.
Good to be here, Nigel.
So look, Patrick, first thing people are going to want to know, Poilievre, you part of that family?
Proud to say that I am. Yes, indeed. I'm Pierre Poilievre's brother and grew up with him in South Calgary here.
All right. Well, thank you, Patrick. Thought we better lay that out right away. Patrick, after all the outrage around zoning, I was expecting a revolution. But it was a low turnout. What was it, sort of 30% something? Certainly wasn't 40%. That's not a revolution. That's not outraged taxpayers coming forward and saying, we demand change. And up in Edmonton, where they face the same things, we got a new mayor who calls himself centre-left. Andrew Knack is his name. I don't know much about him, but at any rate, in Edmonton, that's who they chose. Probably no surprise there. But has anything changed in Calgary City Hall?
Well, Nigel, I feel like that has yet to be seen. We've got a new mayor here in Calgary, pending a recount, of course. And, Jeremy Farkas, I think, has stated, from what I've heard, that he doesn't want to define himself as right or left. He wants to work with other councillors and see what he can get accomplished for the city of Calgary.
So, that sounds a purple thing.
Purple thing, right?
So it's not another Nenchi.
Yeah, well, I mean, I certainly hope not. From what I've seen from Jeremy in the past, he's taken principled stands on some issues at personal cost, and we'll see if he has the ability to work together. There has been a bit of a reputation from his last term on council where he was sort of opposed from the majority, and from my view, that's not necessarily a bad thing. If the majority's wrong, I'd like to see someone show leadership and oppose them. So we'll see what comes from Jeremy. He's going to have some work to do. He's got a lot of new councillors. 10 members of this council are brand new and have never been on council before. So he certainly got some work to do to get council working with him.
Now, when you're looking at, in Edmonton, it's a left-wing city. You get a left-wing council. You get a left-wing MP. You get a left-wing MLA. We kind of know roughly what the game is up there. But Calgary still thinks it's conservative, even though it hasn't really elected a conservative council for what, 15 years nearly. These are you just said these are an unknown quantity. These new councillors. These new councillors, 10 of them we really don't know very much about at all. Well, what's your sense? Has there been a little bit of an ideological shift on council?
Well, I can say, for a generation now, Calgary has failed to elect a conservative council, and you can see the reasoning for that when you have a turnout in the mid-30s here, like we seem to have had this election. And it seems the people who are most likely to turn out are those who have a vested interest in who's elected, such as the public service workers in the city of Calgary. They'd show up in much larger numbers than the average. And I think that's why we end up having a more left-leaning council than what's reflected in the wider public. So when it comes to have things shifted at City Hall, I would certainly say they have. Last election, we on day one probably had 12 or 13 councillors who were leaning towards the left of the spectrum, whereas in this council, it seems we have a pretty even mix on day one here. And I do think things shifted over the term of this prior council, where we had 5 or 6 who were voting in a more sensible direction closer to the end of the term. But from day one, we had 13 or 14 people declare a climate emergency on day one. So I think that shows the ideological leanings of the people who were elected.
What's the chances of seeing that turned over?
Seeing which turned over?
Make one of the first orders of business to take away the climate emergency, which is kind of farcical. And there's a few other things that, like renaming Fort Calgary and so on, which could be undone by a council that wanted to show that new people are running it with new ideas.
Right. I certainly hope that the current council would consider rescinding the climate emergency in the near future. It's not something a lot of people discussed on the campaign. I do think the first order of business is going to be the rezoning. They're going to get to that quickly, and we'll see if they can get the 10 votes required to overturn it. But these other issues that most Calgarians were shocked to see happen, especially the renaming of Fort Calgary. And, we had some other bonkers suggestions throughout the term as well, canceling Canada Day fireworks and single-use plastics bans and things like that. And some have already been overturned, but I certainly would like to see them rescind that climate emergency as soon as possible.
Coming back to what you were saying about people having a direct and vested interest in the outcome of the election, and you said, well, obviously the city workers do, understood, but surely every person who owns property in this city, or for that matter, even who rents property in this city, because in the end the rent reflects the taxes, every one of us has got a vested interest. Why do you think that property owners do not come out in greater numbers to say, put a stop to the overspending, put a stop to the stupid programs, let's have a more sensibly run, not a conservative right-wing fascist council, but let's just make decisions that are sensible.
Right. Well, I think the number one takeaway from this election is that the city of Calgary and the previous council has failed the electorate. We have the highest voter apathy probably in the country here, having only a turnout in the mid-30s. And that is after such a disastrous term on council. So it's not that people don't think that their city council matters. It's more so that they didn't see anything or hear anything that would reflect a positive change in that direction. We had a lot of campaigns saying the same things. We didn't really have anyone coming forward with a drastic overhaul plan, a clear step-by-step plan of how we're going to change things. And I found that that lack of a sort of courageous leadership, showing a clear, distinct change in position from your opponents, is why we didn't have people showing up in large numbers.
Now, Patrick, what would it, if you were courageous, if you were a courageous, newly elected councillor on the city of Calgary, what would be the courageous approach to reforming? I have a feeling it's not just the city councillors. There's something else you've got to change.
Well, I mean, having worked the last 4 years at City Hall, I was lucky enough to work for my home ward in Ward 13 for Councillor Dan McLean. And how
does he do, by the way?
Dan did exceptional.
Yeah.
Residents of Ward 13 were very happy with the performance over the last 4 years. And
great staff work. It has to be that.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
All right. Sorry. Carry on.
No, and I really thought Councillor McLean was one of the top performers on council the last 4 years. He's one of the people who was willing to listen to his constituents, vote on their behalf, and work hard to ensure that when residents were in contact with us, that we made the changes needed within the community that we could to listen to residents and deal with their concerns effectively. So I think Ward 13 residents spoke loud and clear that was the case.
Good. Coming back to the point, though, that my fault, we got off track. I do this all the time. Look, you're a courageous alderman, you're a courageous councillor, you've just been elected, and you're going to make a difference in City Hall. Assuming that you could even get some people to work with you, what's the first big obstacle that you're going to run up against?
Well, I mean, the number one thing we need to change at the city of Calgary is the leadership, right? And the leadership comes from...
You are the leadership.
Well,
you're the courageous, newly elected councillor.
Sadly, in recent years, the leadership has not come from council, and the leadership has come from the chief administrative officer of the city. That's the leader. That's the person who probably has more power than anybody around City Hall, even more than the mayor or city council. And that's the thing I think that needs to change. Council needs to wrestle back control of the budget, control of departments, and become more responsive to residents. What's happened at City Hall here is we have essentially a firewall in the 311 system where residents can't even get in touch with their elected officials, can't get in touch with the departments that they need to talk to when it comes to their roads and parks and services. And that's what needs to change. I don't understand why we have to interface with the computer system or a phone banking system of people who don't even actually, half the time, probably aren't even in the city of Calgary. Whereas we should, when we used to be able to get in touch with our local representatives, a lot of these offices are not even responding to their constituents. Over the 4 years, I'd hear that from other wards, residents who are frustrated. They'd send emails into their city councillor. They're not getting a response. They submit 311 requests that just summarily get closed without action or attention. That's unacceptable. These are things that need to change in the city of Calgary. And I find it's the culture. There's a culture of essentially the not serving the residents that's developed in the city of Calgary. And I think the leadership on council need to wrestle that back and say, no, we're here to serve the public.
Well, now, wait a minute. You worked for Dan McLean. You had an office.
Right.
That office had a phone number.
Right.
So if somebody in Ward 13 had a pothole, they could phone that number and you would answer.
Right.
And you would say, hey, Dan, you better take this one.
Right.
And he would take it. So how is it? What do you mean when you say that you can't get hold of your elected representative?
Well, I can tell you in Ward 13 you could, right? Our office, we operated in that fashion where we wanted to be responsive to residents. I can't speak for other offices, but I do know that we would hear from residents from other wards saying, I can't get a hold of my city councilor. They won't respond to me. More troubling is actually when people are trying to get in touch with administration for assistance with work in the ward. Now, unfortunately, from the ward office, we can't patch a pothole, right? We can't mow the grass. We can certainly try and get in touch with administration on the residents' behalf. And that's something we did throughout our term and struggled greatly to get things done. There's something off with the services at the city of Calgary. And we'd hear from numerous residents who'd submit 311s and never hear back. There'd be no response. There'd be no work done. And the resident would be left wondering, where did my request go? What happened to it?
Well, let me tell you a quick story, and you tell me whether this is typical or I was, lucky or what. Where I live, going for a walk one day with a dog, I see somebody has backed into a road sign, regular city property road sign. There it is, laying on the ground. I sort of watched for about 6 weeks, and nobody came to do anything about it. So I eventually did what I've just suggested. I got hold of my local councillor. And he said, oh, yeah, really? No kidding. Send me a picture. Oh, yeah, road sign's down, isn't it? Another week went by, and a pickup truck came by. Mm-hmm. Pickup truck. Keep that in mind. Somebody gets out, takes a look. Clearly a city manager or an employee in the line of command is confirming that there is indeed a road sign down. Right. Didn't throw it in the pickup and take it away. It sat there for a couple more days. Right. And then finally, a crew arrived. Mm-hmm. And just happened to catch them in the act, so to speak. And 2 guys. And they threw this thing in the pickup and away it went. And weeks later, it was replaced. Right. Is that a typical City Hall story, or is the typical City Hall story that I never even got hold of my councillor?
Right. Well, I would say it depends on the ward you live in. I'd say some councillors are better than others. I won't name names here today. I can tell you that the people who didn't respond are probably not in office anymore after this most recent election. There is a time where we can get that accountability, and it is on election day. And that's what's discouraging about seeing the 35% turnout or the mid-30s turnout is, that was your opportunity to hold your councillors accountable. Now, of course, many of these people didn't even run again this time around, right? We had several of the Hateful Eight not even show up to the polls because they knew they wouldn't get elected.
Did any of them survive this election?
Well, I can say one of them did, and that being Raj Dhaliwal in Ward 5. But from my understanding, he was a good constituency city councillor, and that's why he won his ward, right? So he may not have been on the same side of the ideological perspective as me, but at the same time, he did serve his constituents and was reelected accordingly. But if you look over to Ward 11, again, I won't name names, but you can see the results of a councillor who was not responsive to their residents.
Right. So we need to talk about the mayoral race. Jody Gondek, there's going to be a recount. We don't know for sure at this stage whether it's indeed going to be Mr. Farkas or Sonia Sharp, but we do know that it's not going to be Jody Gondek.
Right.
In an election when not much seems to have changed, the revolution didn't come, the torches and the pitchforks. She changed. She was rejected.
Right.
How would you interpret that?
Well, I mean, I would have been completely stunned had she been reelected. Seeing some of the things that occurred throughout this council term, both from a behind-the-scenes perspective, but even on a public perspective. I mean, I've never seen such poor leadership of our city. I mean, on day one, for her to be trying to railroad a sitting city councillor who was duly elected, to be passing bylaws like the single-use plastics bylaw, the climate emergency, the climate action plan, $87 billion, the blanket rezoning, despite fierce opposition. There's more to, the public protest bylaw, banning public protests in public places, things like that, things that the CCF have said are a violation of our constitutional freedoms. And these are
the CCF, that would be Canadian Constitutional Foundation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
To see some of these actions, and stepping out of your jurisdiction, battling the province on any number of issues, and just being adversarial, sneaky, and underhanded. I mean, I just saw really, really poor leadership over the last 4 years. And, Mayor Gondek worked extremely hard, had different positions than I, but there were some things that were just from my perspective, straight up unethical and not the right way to represent our city. So I feel like it's a new era for the city of Calgary, regardless of who wins between Jeremy Farkas and Sonia Sharp. It's going to be addition by subtraction in that regard.
Nice way to put it. Addition by subtraction. The Green Line. How do you think this new council is going to look at that?
Well, for
the Green Line, for people who aren't following this closely, I think I'm right in saying it's a line that runs north-south.
Right.
It terminates more or less where the old Eau Claire Market was, and brings people in from, up Centre Street?
Well, correct. There is some debate and decisions to be made as to how they're going to enter the downtown still at this stage. And I'm not an expert on the Green Line itself. It wasn't an issue under my purview in my time in Dan's office, but it's a huge expenditure, and it seems the ridership projections are changing over time. Certainly, we need to see a connected city and a better connected city for residents who live in those areas. But it's going to be a significant financial burden for the city to carry. And it'll be interesting to see what this council decides to do. And of course, the province is involved as well, determining how we're going to access the downtown and what the future is that connects up to the center north of the city as well, because that was the part of the initial plans for the Green Line.
Well, does the city council actually have the option of saying this is not a good use of taxpayer money, whether it's municipal or provincial, forget the whole thing?
Well, I certainly believe they would still have that possibility. It would not be an easy one. I think there'd probably have to be, considering the votes that have already occurred on it, you'd probably need a super majority in order to make that happen. And there would be financial implications, right? There's arrangements that have been made, contracts signed, right? It's not a simple thing to just cancel this thing and say, cut your losses, because you're going to have sunk costs on that project. So I don't think it's a simple decision, and we are pretty sort of pot committed on this project, if you will. And I don't envy a council that has to deal with the financial ramifications of that.
Okay. Now then, let's come back to the open zoning. That how many people made their views known to city council when the offer was open? So tell us what you think.
Well, there were thousands and thousands of people who made written submissions, right?
Yes.
I know we're in the range of the high hundreds, close to 1,000 people who showed up in person.
Mm-hmm.
It was a record, right? A record showing for a public hearing in the city of Calgary, and a vast majority in opposition. I think it was close to 90% of written submissions were against blanket rezoning. Somewhere in the range of high 60s or low 70s of the in-person submissions were opposed to blanket rezoning. And I've heard a lot of people justify, well, there's only a certain type of person who showed up to those hearings. It wasn't representative of the population at large. Well, I mean, my argument to that would be, well, these are people who cared enough to show up, right? So the people who did support blanket rezoning obviously didn't have as much passion or vigor behind their position to show up. And the reality is you can only count those who do show up to have their voices heard. And it was disappointing to see council pass that bylaw. And you can see now it is going to have to be rescinded, and it's going to be messy, right? It's not a simple matter. How are you going to deal with all these pending applications? All the properties have already been rezoned. And what about those places that actually already have a monstrosity sitting next door that's dramatically impacted their parking, their garbage, their property values? It's a real mess that's been created, and this is all due to not listening to the public. And it's a shame that it happened the way it did.
So, could there be a moratorium on rezoning in disputed areas? Is that while we think this one through?
Well, I mean, that would be one option while we figure out the dynamics of how to repeal blanket rezoning. It could be an option as to just to put a freeze on new applications, right? It might be something that city council should consider to do in the immediate term. But, based off last session of council, I mean, we declared climate emergency within a couple of weeks of the election. So I can see they could act pretty quickly on this if they have the desire to do so.
Well, that's, we'll see what they do with it. That seemed to me the thing that was going to get everybody out, and it didn't. So maybe they have a little more leeway to deal with that than I would have imagined. But certainly there are people who have already bought the property that they mean to rezone, and they're financially committed. They may even have their rezoning, their building plans approved.
Right.
You can only stop it up to a certain point.
Exactly.
Okay, the rezoning, line 8. Any other major issues for this council? Sorry, the green line. I call it line 8. The green line and the rezoning. What's the other big issue this council has to look at?
Well, I think the number one issue that hadn't been talked enough nearly in the campaign, and that's property taxes. Over the last council term, we saw a 30% increase in spending over a 4-year period, which is just a remarkable increase in spending. We've taken on huge expenditures in the arena deal, the Green Line, various other infrastructure projects. We had the Olympic Plaza transformation. The city finances are getting out of control, right? And we're seeing a decline in services which doesn't reflect that increase in property taxes. And how is this council going to deal with the increased spending and the decrease and declining quality of services the city provides?
How should they deal with it?
Well, I mean, they have to. I mean, the reality is people can't afford to continue to pay these taxes. Businesses, you look at our downtown, it's got a 30% vacancy rate. People can't afford to pay these taxes. Businesses don't want to operate here. They're choosing to operate on the outskirts of the city in other jurisdictions because our property taxes are so out of control. This is a serious issue that this council needs to address. And if they don't, it'll be at the peril of the rest of us.
Patrick, thank you for coming in and laying this out for us. It is not nearly as easy as just electing a new council, is it?
Certainly isn't, but I do have a lot of faith this council will do a better job than the last, and I wish them all the best in doing what's best for Calgary.
Well, on that optimistic note, thank you again.
Thank you, Nigel. Appreciate you.
And for the Western Standard, I'm Nigel Hannaford. Good night.